Namaste. Why is there so much emphasis on mathematics in modern science? According to Galileo, apparently, the book of nature is written in the language of mathematics. But is that actually true? In Chapter 1 of Idols of the Mind versus True Reality, Dr. Bhaktimadhava Puri distinguished between the logics of mechanical, chemical, and biological systems. Mechanical systems, like clocks, are a unity of parts that retain their individual identity whether or not they are in the system, which manifests due to external cause and purpose. Clocks exist so that people can keep track of time to moderate and organize their daily activities. Such a purpose is external to the clock itself, plus a mechanic or clockmaker is required to externally assemble the gears and other parts. On the other hand, biological systems, i.e., any living entity from cells to organisms, are a unity of parts that exist and function in a much more dynamic, organic, integrated, and holistic way. The identity of each part of a biological system is simultaneously dependent upon 1. Itself, 2. The other parts, and 3. The greater whole, which is more than the sum of its parts. Further, the parts internally develop together. The eyes, brain, lungs, heart, and other limbs of an organism grow together as the whole develops from an embryo to a mature life form. The biological system develops internally for the sake of the living entity itself, which exists for its own inner purpose, whether we understand that as survival, experiencing pleasure, or something higher. So, this difference between mechanical systems dependent on external cause and purpose, whose parts retain a rigid identity whether or not they are part of a system, and biological systems dependent upon internal cause and purpose, whose parts are identified in a much more fluid, interdependent, and dialectical way, clearly demonstrates that different logics apply to mechanical and biological systems, both of which appear in nature. Thus, it is appropriate to challenge Galileo and like-minded people by stating that the book of mechanics or mechanical nature may be written in the language of mathematics. However, the book of biology is written in the language of teleological, goal-directed activity. The classic logical law of identity applies to mathematics and mechanics, while the dialectic principle of identity and difference must be recognized and considered to comprehensively describe the dynamic organic wholeness of life and consciousness. Leibniz's principle of the identity of indiscernibles, originally enunciated in his Discourse on Metaphysics in 1686, describes that two separate objects or entities cannot have all their properties in common. Thus, two apples, even if they are of the same species, are not identical to each other. They may have slightly different shapes, color, taste, weight, etc. Even so-called identical twins may be extremely similar. However, they exhibit different feelings, thoughts, and wills. In mathematics, the expression 1 plus 1 strictly refers to two identical entities. The point is that counting numbers in mathematics and counting physical objects deal with different entities. The logic of nature is different from the logic of mathematics. Even Einstein acknowledged that, quote, as far as the laws of mathematics refer to reality, they are not certain, and as far as they are certain, they do not refer to reality, end quote. Ancient Eastern and Western cosmological paradigms considered celestial bodies to be free and rational spirits whose long-term consistent movements were performance of ritual rather than mathematically constrained mechanical motions. This is not so different from Newton's recognition that the unlikely stability of the solar system is evidence of intelligent management, which he attributed to, quote, Lord God Pantocrator, end quote. This is rational, since disorganized chaos, which is more likely to occur if only the random or blind activity of physical forces were responsible for maintaining the integrity of the cosmos, is the result of a lack of intelligence. Unfortunately, as explained last chapter, the mathematical bones of Newton's Principia Mathematica were taken by modern physics and presented as a mechanical model of the universe without the Pantocrator. As described by Dr. B. M. Puri, however, things seem to be changing. Many scholars agree that the argument for a clockwork universe as a strict consequence of Newtonian dynamics is no longer logically valid, although it is still held to be true by many in the general public and among many scientists. Due to complexity and errors accumulating exponentially over time, we cannot be certain of determinism during short intervals, in principle or even for classical systems. Nature seems to draw a curtain on the predictions of mechanical motion in a clockwork universe that is beyond our ability to unveil. Thus, in 1986, British mathematician James Lighthill publicly apologized. Quote, "We are all deeply conscious today that the enthusiasm of our forebears for the marvelous achievements of Newtonian mechanics led them to make generalizations in this area of predictability, which, indeed, we may have generally tended to believe before 1960, but which we now recognize were false. We collectively wish to apologize for having misled the general educated public by spreading ideas about the determinism of systems satisfying Newton's laws of motion that, after 1960, were to be proved incorrect." Historically, Galileo (1564 through 1642) was the first prominent natural philosopher in modernity to emphasize the role of mathematics in what became the natural sciences. However, the worldview that enabled his belief that math is the language of nature was quite different from what scientists think today. Galileo made the distinction between primary and secondary qualities. Secondary qualities of an object like color and taste belonged to the consciousness of the observer, thus they were considered not objective and less important. The primary quantitative measurable qualities, such as weight, shape, and size, belonged to the object itself and were thus worthy of scientific study. Today, scientists think that all qualities of objects belong to objects themselves, while the observer occupies an inconsequential, third-party perspective of natural phenomena. Dr. B. M. Puri explains that the problem with dividing sense perceptions from objects is, of course, that sense perceptions have to come from somewhere. One doesn't just experience some quality without its relation to the object whose quality it is. A more integral metaphysics is needed to heal the division that was promoted by Galileo and others. The mathematization of nature was based on a metaphysics that is divisive and incomplete. By following the history of the development of ideas after Galileo, we witness a more integrated metaphysics emerge concerning the relationship between the subjective and objective. René Descartes, 1596 through 1650, emphasized the numerical nature of space and time, and John Locke, 1632 through 1704, said that an object of a particular size, shape, etc., is indistinguishable from the space it occupies of the same quantitative measure. Then, George Berkeley, 1685 through 1753, thought that both primary and secondary qualities were determined by experience or consciousness, essentially that the world is in the mind. This marked a shift towards an immaterial idealism rather than a materialistic realism. Immanuel Kant, 1724 through 1804, came to clarify that the objective thing in itself, noumena, is unknowable to consciousness, but it is real and distinct from the phenomena that appear to our senses. F. W. J. Schelling, 1775 to 1854, started to conceive that there is a dialectic relation, an identity and difference between subjectivity and objectivity, an idea that reached its maturity with G. W. F. Hegel, 1770 through 1831. Hegel's systematic philosophy held that the ideal is real and the real is the ideal. Reality is the simultaneous unity in diversity of thought and being. He described that the world is not only in a particular subjective mind or observer, but the particular observer is also within the objective world of universality, and both of these are sublated in the unity in diversity of the absolute idea, that is by and for itself. The development of the absolute idea, spirit coming to know itself as spirit, is expressed in the phenomenology of spirit as a spectrum of evolving forms of consciousness where the content of each form is a determinate subject-object relation. The two primary forms enunciated throughout this book, Idols of the Mind versus True Reality, have been the understanding, or Verstand in German, and reason, or Vernunft. Despite this history of Western ideas that provides a more holistic and comprehensive lens to study experience and the relationship between mind and matter through, modern science has largely ignored the contributions of Kant and Hegel, what to speak of Eastern wisdom such as Bhagavad Vedanta. When we utilize the lens which Hegel provides, it becomes apparent that modern science since Galileo has been largely stuck at the form of consciousness called understanding. The analytic understanding is divisive and conceives things in opposition to one another without comprehending their higher unity. Since this form of consciousness is conducive to mathematical and mechanistic thinking, it is necessary to rationally progress beyond understanding onto self-consciousness, reason, and spirit to have a complete conception of the origin and nature of life and consciousness. As Dr. Bhaktimadhava Puri explains, mathematics works within its own framework of certainty based upon a set of axioms of mathematics, thus yielding specifically determinable results. There is, however, no reason to expect that the reality of nature obeys such axioms, or that observations and experiences of nature should in any way correspond to the realm of mathematical logic. Thus, the employment of mathematics in science is more or less just to give the scientists comfort and security, rather than any real or ontological connection between mathematics and science. Furthermore, Gödel did much to dispel even the certainty that mathematics falsely claimed for itself. So far as the touted accuracy of quantum theory is concerned, it must be understood that even false scientific theories can give amazingly accurate results. In the past, the Chinese beat a gong to make the moon dog stop eating the sun god during a solar eclipse. The theory worked flawlessly 100% of the time. That quantum mechanics works so accurately for a single electron or even two particles ignores the fact that, as a mathematical construct, there is no such thing as a single electron or two in the universe. The accuracy of the whole theory breaks down when we consider any real-life situations without idealized approximations. In order for modern science to progress beyond impoverished conceptions that our differentiated experience reality is reducible to a homogeneous monistic principle, such as particles of a fundamental physical substance, or even the impersonal, undifferentiated consciousness of abstract idealists, and also that living conscious entities are mechanical conglomerates of material building blocks, it is necessary to acknowledge the historical bias of presuming that the book of nature is written in the language of mathematics, and further recognize that the mechanistic paradigm still dominating modern science is substantiated on the presumption of the mathematization of nature. We advocate replacing the inappropriate application of the logical law of identity to nature, as demonstrated with the identity of indiscernibles, with the dialectic principle of identity indifference. Contradiction is fundamental to reality. Both differentiation and identity simultaneously exist together. Both subject and object dynamically interpenetrate and influence each other. This requires a shift from the divisive analytical understanding to holistic systematic reason and its higher development in the progression of conceptual thinking. Satyam eva jayate. Shri Shri Guru Gauranga Jayata.